We are back. This is season 3 of An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. And this season, I'm super excited. I get to have a co-host, a guest commentator, a friend, someone who's going to ask questions, and it's going to be really fun. So, Jamie, why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, hello, everybody. I am Jamie Almanzán. I am a partner and equity coach for the Equity Collaborative. We are an organization that supports public systems throughout the nation to better serve its constituents, particularly the most marginalized. I'm so honored and excited to be a part of this with you, Peter.
Jamie was a part of the podcast in season 2. We had such an amazing chemistry, and his partner, Greg, was like, do I need to be here? It seems like the two of you really hit it up. And he was like a third wheel. What I'll do, though, is put in as a link to your organization. So as people want to learn more, I think that they should, because I know, having gotten to know you over this last year, there's really important work being done. And it isn't being done to, it's being done with. And I think there's a real distinction there. All right. So let's talk about this. You have the school you're starting. You had a kid going back to school. A lot of emotions involved with that.
Yes, of course.
You know, there's like that Simpsons where they're going off to camp and all, as the bus leaves, all the peers start to cheer.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very similar. Like my kids were just like, you gotta go back. We're ready. Everyone's ready.
So you taught, I taught. As a teacher, preparing for kids to come back to school is very different than as a parent preparing for kids to go back to school. And it never really occurred to me I was also a lot younger, but it never really occurred to me the difference. And that as a teacher, I'm really thinking about all the things that go with the kickoff of school. Like, is my classroom ready? What am I doing for the first couple of units? What does my schedule look like? You know, all that kind of stuff that goes with the job. And as a parent, it's all like, I'm exhausted. Like, thank God this is over. Thank God. And because summer is great. I look forward to it. But now I'm like, oh, time to move on.
Well, on the professional side, you remember as a teacher, and certainly if you've been an administrator as well, you get to the point where you're done with the adult meetings. No more adult meetings. Let's get the kids back.
Yeah.
Let's get the kids in here, because they're there not for adults. They're there for kids.
Yeah.
And so I can always remember sort of like, all right, this is our last meeting. I promise. Let's get our rooms ready. Let's get our kid back. Let's get going. I'm trying to remember if there were any that stand out as highlights for sort of bringing back people and being excited. Like for me, my greatest regret as a superintendent was I really wanted to do sort of almost like a fair at this ball field that the school district owned, but it was maintained by the Parks and Rec. And I thought a bandstand and barbecue and food trucks and people bring their kids. And we just sort of pause for a moment and say, like, we're going to have a great year. Right now, though, let's enjoy this time together. Have a great year.
So what prevented you from doing that?
Oh my God. I just would run into people who are such naysayers about it. Like, no one's going to come. What if it rained? People really don't want to come to that kind of thing. And I thought to myself, I totally disagree. It's not worth the argument over it. And I decided, forget. Like, if you're all going to be so naysayers about it. I regret it. I say I should have just been like, you know what? I think it'll be fun. We should do it. I've
seen principals that have sort of rolled out the circus on the first day of school. And this is the one that's coming to mind. Principal in Wake County, North Carolina, at Middle Creek Elementary. And this was actually not for the first day of school, but it's what they do on the first day of school. And it's every teacher's out in front. There's no being in your classrooms. All of us feel like I should be. Like, I've got a lot of stuff to get finalized, all that stuff. Every teacher was in front, music playing, wearing their shirts. They all had the t-shirt on, and balloon art going in. And the music was just like, Stevie Wonder's playing, and you can't help but dance and smile. And everybody's like, I'm so happy you're here. It was all to make the kids feel good about where they were going for today. We're here. We're excited.
Well, I imagine you always have children who arrive at school who are not enrolled. And there are decisions that some schools make that say you can't come in until you've enrolled, or go to the health department, get your immunization records. I imagine at that school that you just described, where's the mom here? We're going to get you into a class. Let's go, and there are laws that allow you to sort of like pause on like the immunization kind of stuff, right? I mean, like the McKinney-Vento Act, for example, for homeless students. You can't require a child to bring in immunizations, as a prerequisite to going into school. So just use that as your fallback. We'll get that all figured out, but we are so happy you're here.
Yes.
Right? We're so happy. Like, I got to make sure I don't sing too much of it so Stevie Wonder, comes after us because we got no money, Stevie. It seems like a really good transition to guests. What a perfect way to talk about someone who really lives this value of love. Let's get to it. Our guest today is Dr. Luvelle Brown, an experienced educator who has held positions as a teacher, assistant principal, school CIO, superintendent of schools, and is the superintendent of Ithaca, New York. Luvelle, welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm honored.
I'm so grateful that you agreed to be on here. So nice to speak to you today. I think each year I make an effort to say hello to you at AASA's national conference because truly, I don't mean to make you blush, but to be in your presence is always just like a jolt of energy and optimism. You're always so gracious to meet me as if like you're seeing an old friend. And one of the reasons so many of us seek you out is that you're always encouraging other leaders to be proud of what they've accomplished. And that's an important message for all leaders doing some of the most difficult work. And so, I say over and over that it's never been harder to be a teacher, never been harder to be a leader in today's world, and particularly in public education. And you and Shelley Berman, you guys co-authored a book. And I wonder if you would talk about this because it's really kind of about that. It's called A Call to Courage. So would you mind telling us about the Call to Courage?
Sure. Thanks for having me on again. And thanks for the constructive and positive comment. Shelley and I have come together and over the last year and a half or so, we've been sort of capturing what's been happening around our industry with regards to the narrative, with regard to the resistance to efforts to generate a wonderful experience for all young people. So there's been a lot of conversation around public education. Most of it has been negative and non-constructive. It's been more destructive. So we went back into history and we've sort of mapped out and documented how this has happened before and why. And then we sort of captured some of the stories that are happening most currently and today. And when you put those two together, history is repeating itself or history is rhyming at the very least. And then we sort of provide some strategies for us educators to push back, to step up, to be the leader. That word leader comes up a lot in the book and in the text. Be the leader that our communities need at this critical juncture and moment in our history for schools, as we again are trying to cultivate a wonderful experience for all young people that's inclusive, that creates a sense of belonging, and that is powerful. And throughout history, when that has happened, folks have resisted and pushed back. So we sort of capture all of that and hopefully have given folks a way to navigate these troubled waters at this moment.
There's this phrase that kind of runs through my head, or a term or sort of an expression of, whenever you agitate for change, that the system will work aggressively to get back to status quo. It likes status quo. Those who have benefited from the system certainly want to remain within that system. Are there stories or something sort of that pops up in your mind from the book that, that really sort of typifies or speaks to what you've seen in history or what you are trying to change or something that you might share with the audience?
Yeah, I would say if you remove the words diversity, equity, and inclusion from today's conversations around public education and you plug in integration, busing, if you remove critical race theory from the conversation today and plug in communism or Marxism, we're having the same conversation. So what we were able to show is that the game plan has been the same: to go after standards, state standards, go after books, book banning, go after the individual leaders who are trying to cultivate this experience for all young people. So things are happening in very similar ways. And I'm asking our audiences and the folks who are consuming the text to listen for the similarities and to take some lessons learned when pushing back. So if you can see it happening, you can predict that it's going to happen, you can be unbothered and also strategize how to interrupt it.
Well, I will make sure that we link the book to the show notes. Your book, I think, also complements a book that actually was written in 1910. Well, actually, it was between 1910 and 1912. A gentleman named Scott Nearing was hired to go around the country. The book is called The New Education. And as I was looking at your book, I'm like, oh my God, these should be sort of side by side, because between 1910 and 1912, he goes around the United States. He starts to look at promising practices because essentially he was asked, hey, it appears that we've just created this conveyor belt education, very industrialized. We're just preparing kids for factories. And we imagine that there are examples around the country of schools doing really innovative things. And it's sort of the same conversations we're having now in terms of project-based learning, place-based learning, the kinds of sort of looking at what are kids curious about, how can we embed creativity. And so he finds examples throughout the United States. And he also finds examples of the things that we are talking about now in terms of what we're trying to dismantle. standardized tests, the limited opportunities for creativity, the uniformity over individuality. And so it's just sort of an interesting sort of side by side with like, what have we learned from history and what are we still trying to do for our children? So anyhow, I put that out there for you. So, I've read a little bit of the book and just like other leaders that I've talked to, Luvelle Brown in Montgomery, Alabama, for example, there's this caution to leaders in communities that are interested in change. It's to say that, listen, change does require courage and it also requires time. And change is not immediate. And I know that superintendents are, having been one as well, is sort of, you get a part of your community that says you're moving too fast, another part of your community that's saying, where you been? Let's go. We've got work to do. How do you communicate that to constituents who feel like you're maybe not moving fast enough when you're trying to make meaningful and enduring change?
Language is important. Instead of saying change, I say continuous improvement. I try to stress to folks that this is an ongoing journey. Instead of checking boxes, instead of chequity, I call it equity. Like, this work takes time. And frankly, the folks who are in these seats who are working on it right now will never see the fruits of their labor be achieved. But we hope we are inspiring some folks to take our places when we're gone. The vision I have for public education is a 70, 80-year vision. To have something that is good for all young people, that is truly differentiated, that meets the needs of the very diverse communities that come into our space, that is going to be a lot of work. It's going to require a lot of mindset and skill set shift that won't just happen over the course of one tenure of a superintendent. It's going to take generations. So continuous improvement instead of change, which is sometimes either or thinking, which is never something that our communities or schools are set up for. Continuous improvement and collaboration, words that are going to, words I use to indicate to folks that this is going to take a while and we have to do it in a way where it's sustainable. Quick change, a board vote or a new leader changed everything back. But real sustainable change will survive irrespective of who's on the board, who is the leader. So
yeah, you're really speaking to what would be called like deeper learning, right? Because you're saying, look, I can add another building, facilities, I can add technology, I can even pay people more. And that may make some immediate sort of goodwill towards change, but it doesn't make enduring change. And so I'm curious, as I've talked to leaders across the country, one of the sort of themes that I keep hearing as we recognize that this is really a relay race where we pass a baton and we hope, although hope is not a strategy, but that we hope that what we have placed with the seeds that we've planted, that we're going to see change moving forward. But the theme that I see often is perhaps that we haven't always considered succession planning. I imagine that because you've now been in Ithaca for some time, you had opportunities to leave and chose to stay. I imagine that's because you've begun thinking about who are those people who follow you so that what you have laid there begins to become part of what is the 70 to 80-year plan.
Yeah, it's a mindset and skill set and development over time. From our school district, there are many folks who've gone into superintendencies, conversations like the one we're having today, teaching grad level courses. A leader is always planting seeds, not just in the current job they're in or in the current role or even the community. I have conversations all over the world for this very reason, sharing a message, engaging with folks, cultivating talent, seeking out talent. That is the work of a true educational leader. And that takes time too, but it's a mindset and a skill set shift that will hopefully benefit young people for many generations.
I had a board member who was a basketball coach, and he said to me, "Hey, do you know who Coach K is?" I go, "Yeah, I know who Coach K is," because I was a musician, so he thought maybe I didn't. And so I know everybody knows who Coach K is. And he said, "You know how many of his assistant coaches are out there they have lead coaching jobs right now? That is something you need to be thinking about, because you keep trying to hold on to great people and be willing to allow them to go and go do some great things, knowing that you've helped them with that message, and that message will grow like exponentially. So it's not just this one community, but multiple communities." And I think that's what you're talking about. If you're teaching grad school classes, you've got great people in your team, and then they move on because they've been promoted to other positions where they can influence, then that really does make your 70-day-year plan more likely.
Well, that's the word.
Just going to pause and thank those who are joining us. Our guest today is Dr. Luvelle Brown, Superintendent of the Ithaca Public Schools in Ithaca, New York. So in my book and in the leadership model that I use to advise others, there's a dimension called nested patterns. And nested patterns really is sort of Peter Senge's question about how do we want to be together? It's the muscle of an organization's work. And it really speaks to the question of exactly that. How do we want to be? And there are two terms: empathy, understanding how others, trying to put yourself in their shoes, but also compassion. How can I help? And so empathy and compassion. And from the moment I heard you speak in San Antonio, and then again this past year in San Diego, when you joined Shelley Berman and others like Scott Menzel, you spoke about reclaiming a district's narrative. And I absolutely fell for what you have generally referred to as a culture of love. In fact, I think you wrote a book with the same title. And so it's all about transforming one's culture. And I wonder if you would just take a moment to tell us about this, a culture of love. It's like a sacred value for you.
Very much so. Well, we've defined what love is. Love is patient, honest, caring, forgiving, trusting, committed, and selfless. And for each one of those principles, we've defined what that means and what it looks like in an individual's individual personal life, and more importantly, in the context of this conversation, what it looks like in practice in an organization. And, we say all the time, love is not the default in schools. If it was the default, we wouldn't have the kind of achievement results that we see across the country for generations. We wouldn't have the struggle that young people are having in our spaces and the disparate outcomes. So if love was the default, we would be having a different conversation. But love is the struggle. And I can show folks how, a lack of forgiveness shows up in code of conduct policies, or a lack of patience shows up in the ways in which we grade. So this love thing is serious for us. And it's a question that we put on the table often when we're engaging with one another. And more importantly, when we create policies and systems and structures that are governing the ways in which we work. So if it's not loving, we have to rethink about how to make it loving. And that's where we struggle. So that changes culture. That creates conflict. That requires a significant amount of reflection. People have to reflect on their individual practices, but the organizational practices as well. That conflict, that reflection, that leads to systemic shifts, which only then impacts the culture. So I hope that makes sense. I mean, that's a nice.
It makes total sense. No, and I also think that you're saying something that is pretty profound, which is that it's not just that you have established values associated with this overarching value of love, but you defined it. And when you define it, then it becomes part of your practice as it serves as a lens through which everything that you do. And so you can look at some districts have a policy about truancy, that if you don't come to school, then you can be suspended. It makes no sense to me. But then if you filter that through this value of love, a culture of love, then it's showing, so how are we showing our kids that they belong when we kick them out and they're not coming? Why are we not looking at sort of like Desmond Tutu's phrase of, why do we keep pulling people out of the river? Why don't we find out why they're falling in? Why is the kid not coming to school? So then what do we need to do in terms of our own practices to change it? What does the term an imperfect leader mean to you?
It means humanity. It means you have a human that is reflective and that is humble, reflective of their own stuff, their imperfections, their biases, their invisible spots. So an imperfect leader is understanding of their own humanity and are working to be better every day. Those are the best leaders. If thinking you're perfect or striving for perfection, then you aren't humble enough to lead people or be a leader of people. And so that's what it means to me. And I like to think that I'm imperfect, and I like to think I'm an imperfect leader because every day I'm journaling, I'm reflecting, I'm asking folks to give me feedback on my invisible spots. I'm doing work on my implicit and explicit biases.
And we'll be right back. Hey, district leaders, I know you already know this. In schools worldwide, cell phones are posing real challenges on student engagement and mental well-being, and I want you to meet Yonder, a proud sponsor of an imperfect leader. And let me share this story from a visit I made to some schools in Silicon Valley. I asked some kids what they liked about Yonder, and after some funny looks, they shared that actually, with Yonder, teachers don't have to battle with them over phones anymore. In fact, one kid said to me he didn't have to worry anymore about his parents texting him in class, and the kid next to him sort of shoved him and goes, "Texting? My mom used to FaceTime me in class." I want to introduce you to a support system that increases teaching and learning. I want you to discover why 1 million students choose Yonder daily. Minimize distractions, maximize learning potential. To learn more, go to overyonder.com. YONDR. We're back for segment 2 of An Imperfect Leader called Imperfect Leadership in After Action. My guest is Dr. Luvelle Brown, Superintendent of Schools in the Ithaca, New York School District and co-author of The Call to Courage. In this segment, we ask our guests to deconstruct a decision they made and then we discuss it. So Dr. Brown, what happened?
I'm thinking about decisions, not just one decision, because there were decisions around implementation of some tools, technology tools, to be more specific. Going through a superintendent prep program, an admin prep program, you were always told to be data driven. Then we shifted to data informed. And, you use data as administrators to drive decisions and to sort and select and to change policy. And, I think I was committed to doing that, but I learned a lot. As I think about a decision, I'm thinking about the implementation of a system that was built and paid for to capture student achievement results on standardized or local assessments, and then to use that technology system that was implemented across the school district to have teachers talk about the data, make shifts, reassess, talk about the data again. So it was a part of our ongoing improvement process, but it was a technology system that was going to be the repository for all that information. I now realize how much I was wrong in my thinking and how many mistakes I made in implementing something at scale at that call for a school district, if that makes sense.
Okay, we're going to get into that. We're going to get into, and I'm going to ask you about what got overlooked. If I, just to summarize so I make sure I understand correctly. So you're a school district that absolutely embraces this professional learning community aspect. In the past, they've used, someone would give them maybe a report, or they would bring their own grade books, or they bring some student work, and they would have their grade level team meetings or their department meetings, and they would review and talk about kids. And here was an opportunity to become even more sort of laser focused on the data instead of what sometimes happens in our professional learning community. And they sometimes admire the problem, right? Also, you start talking about the kid and talking about the kid's parent and talking about the kid's home life. And those are really important as you're trying to help kids, but then it becomes singularly focused as opposed to what do a group of children need in terms of skills that they may be missing. So you're going to adopt this data-driven or data-informed new technology is going to help them make better decisions. And it sounds like didn't go so well. So what got overlooked?
Data informs practice if folks care about the data. And what I've learned is you got to ask folks what they care about the most. Teachers, particularly educators. What do you care about? What do you want to know more about? What will change your practice tomorrow? And I can say now with much confidence, most educators won't say more data. So giving them a system or spending a lot of time and money developing a system to give them more data, unless it matters to them, they won't care and they won't use it, or they'll use it inappropriately. So I think that part around asking folks, what do you need the most support and help with first, instead of assuming it? And frankly, as an administrator, we are making a lot of assumptions every day about what teachers want. And we spend a lot of money and time in giving them what we think they want without ever asking them.
What did you mean by they might make decisions that are not, you didn't say not appropriate. You said they may have made the wrong decisions, or they may use that in the wrong way.
Yeah, data literacy is something that's very important. Just helping folks understand how to use data, how to capture it in a way that doesn't perpetuate already deficit mindsets and thinking around young people. If we're trying to increase achievement for young people of color in this country, the worst thing to do is to give them an assessment that is culturally irresponsive, that will not capture their thinking and behaviors in a way that's consistent with their cultural norms and background. So we've used those inappropriate assessments to make decisions, to establish mindsets, to sort and select, to exclude for generations. So I can say with much confidence, yeah, we've used data inappropriately without really understanding how to capture it, what instruments are being used, and then how to talk about it. And
one only needs to look at our gifted programs, for instance, right? So who's more likely, and you're in a university town. I was a superintendent in a university town. So I imagine our data looked fairly similar in terms of 81.1% were white, 10% were Asian. And so you're telling me that, of the 20,000 kids I had in my school district, that only 8% were Black, Latino, Pacific Islander, Native American. Like, come on. So we're not capturing the brilliance that exists because we're using assessments that are flawed, or we're getting false positives about what we think is giftedness. So I imagine you had very similar situation.
Very much so. And when you say that, the kind of resistance and pushback you get is remarkable. It's funny how, only a few people even just are saying what you and I just shared.
So that's really interesting to me in terms of how we don't go to the people most impacted by a decision. We make a decision for them thinking that they're going to use it well, appreciate that they have it at their fingertips. What did you learn about relationships, or what new relationships were formed as a result of this situation?
Yeah, I think this is ongoing too. The disconnect between administrative leadership teacher leadership, other areas of the organization is real. And I've tried throughout my career to try to blur those lines between the administrator and the teacher. And for some reason, because of the culture of our organizations, it continues to be more deeply divided. So here's yet another example of us not talking with one another when thinking about how to implement something like a consistent assessment approach. So I've learned a lot about that divide. I hope to listen to other sessions you do around how to minimize that divide, but it is real. I don't think I've had much success breaking down those walls, even though I've served in all roles. I've been a teacher, I've been an administrator, I've been a teaching assistant, I've been a substitute. And I see how different folks look at one another and how they interact differently based on their roles.
Yeah, based on their titles, and you walk in the room and it changes the dynamic. And, I imagine that you've tried advisories and you've met with the professional development committee, which I imagine in New York is similar to what it was like in Missouri, where each school had individuals who come and advise. I imagine you meet regularly with your teachers union and you get to some extent issues that groups are facing. Often it's immediate, what is immediately in front of them in terms of a working condition or things like that. And it's that visionary work that you're really trying to get at. And sometimes it's hard to crack that nut. But I think to your point, which is you got to keep talking to people and keep going to the people most impacted. And I think over time that you'll get there. But yeah, no, I hear that. What frustrated you? I imagine there was a level of frustration, not anger, but just sort of frustration, that sort of internal tension that, you adopted a tool district-wide and it wasn't bearing fruit or wasn't giving you what you had hoped it was going to give you. What was frustrating?
We continue to look at the results that are pretty predictable. If you're a kid of color, if you're growing up in poverty in this country, your results in schools have been pretty much the same. The data has been flat. And the lack of saying that, the dishonest approaches, whether I'll refer to, that people are taking, that is the truth. In most places, we can't even talk about it in a real way. Because if you talk about it in a real way, you have to do something to interrupt it. And we, frankly, many states are writing laws to disallow us from even talking about the inequities that exist in our schools. So that's frustrating. As a person coming from a marginalized background and looking at the data for young people who are looking just like me, and it's been the same, or one could argue that it's gotten worse, and we're still having the same conversation after sinking literally billions of dollars into our industry, that's a bit frustrating.
That is incredibly frustrating. What could you have done? I mean to say it so flippantly, that's incredibly frustrating. Let me move to the next question. I just want to let it sit there for a minute because you're absolutely right. There are arguments being made that we're 70 years since Brown versus the Board of Education, we've never been more segregated. And I'm not totally sure what we do about it other than to continue to have these conversations, be a resource for each other and try to dismantle the systems that have been oppressive in whatever way that we can locally, and then be able to try to spread that message. I think that you do that. I mean, I can't even begin to imagine what your calendar looks like, because it appears that you're always somewhere talking to not just be that person who's trying to bring optimism and support, because that's what you bring, but also a dose of reality of we've got to do something. And if we're going to do something over the next 70, 80 years, that's going to fundamentally be different. So this generation that follows us will look back at us and say, thank you. Then there's real work to be done, but it isn't done individually. It's done collectively. So
I would say, man, I specialize in giving people things to do tomorrow, next year, and over the next 5 to 10 years. I can give you strategy to dismantle and work on these things. However, I'm now focusing on, at this point in my career, it's clear to me that we must talk about what is it that we all want to commit to. And it's never been more clear to me now that not everyone wants the same thing out of public education. Folks are still struggling with whether or not they see public education as a place that will meet the needs of everyone. Some people don't want that. So we have to step back and decide, have a common mental model and understanding and a commitment to what it is we're endeavoring to do. Because that is why we continue to have the same results, because some folks are figuring out ways to sabotage it or to perpetuate a system that was never intended to meet the needs of everyone. So I'm supposed to step back and let's recommit to something. And that may take years to get to that commitment.
It will take years, because you think about how many states have decided that vouchers are an appropriate way to help some get out of public education, to exit them. It's a gift certificate for the rich is really all that it is. And so, yeah, it is. It's going to take a really concerted effort, no doubt. In the end, what was something that was good that came out of the work that you did? So, you had this experience, you wanted to adopt this technology, and it didn't go as well. But I imagine because of the work that you do, that there was a mid-course correction made and something good has come out of it in the end.
It helped me, and I think it's going to be much more beneficial going forward. Technology will not save our industry. Love will. And those characteristics I mentioned earlier, those are human-to-human interactions. That's us seeing one another's humanity. That's not artificial intelligence. See, love is going to be the new smart. Being able to write code is going to be important. Being able to use technology tools is going to be important. To know the new technology, that's going to be important. But to have the kind of sustainable change and efforts that are going to benefit everyone, that's going to require love. And it's going to take a new level of smartness and thinking to love in that way. And I learned that through that process. I needed to love people more, understand them, talk to them. And then maybe I could have implemented some technology that would have helped them grow. But to lead with the tech was flawed from the jump and from the beginning. And that was a lesson learned.
What advice would you give to an aspiring leader?
You really reflect on which journey you want to take in this industry. Do you want to, I say this to folks all the time, do you want to just be an academic leader where you share articles, you have a circus level conversations, you put out fires, or do you truly want to be that authentic, transformative leader that is changing policies and pedagogies in a real way, changing curriculum, truly committing to interrupting the negativity, the ableist, classist, and racist conversations that occur in our spaces every day? That kind of leader gets a lot of resistance. That kind of leader typically is looking for a job every 3 or 4 years. That kind of leader causes people to be uncomfortable. But that's the one we need now. And there is no escaping the resistance. I get it every day. The hate, I get it every day. The threat, I get every day. There's no escaping that. That's a part of that journey. And I ask folks, just determine which one you're on, because there's no middle ground in it, from my perspective. There's a place for the academic folks, but I'm asking and calling on folks to be more authentic if you're going to do what I'm asking, endeavoring for us all to do.
My guest today was Dr. Luvelle Brown, superintendent in Ithaca, New York. He's got behind him a gorge, and I've been trying to, for the life of me, I was going, oh, am I really going to resist it? I can't resist it. It's gorgeous. Gorgeous.
There we go.
Yeah, there it is. But a co-author of The Call to Courage. And Luvelle, I am so grateful again for your time. I wrote some notes as you were talking about, just people have to care about what they're doing. So they have to care about the data they're collecting. Otherwise, what's the point of doing it? That you have to go to the people who are most impacted by a decision. And that decision, when you're doing it together, will yield some pretty fantastic results. And more than anything, though, is the humanity of the work that we do, and seeing the humans who work alongside us and the humans that we are supporting and serving each day in our schools. And all of that, if you just were to wrap it up, is to say that a culture of love is something real. And when you do embrace it, you will see transformative results. And I just want to thank you again so much for being on the show.
Yeah, appreciate you, man. Thanks for this opportunity.
Okay, Jamie, we are back. So right before going into the conversation, we were talking about love and this value of love. I'd like to start there. What are some of the things you noticed?
This is the thing that stood out for me at the moment. He says, love is patient, honest, caring, forgiving, trusting, committed, and selfless. When I heard that, all of what I'm sharing about how my children are off to school and how I feel about how blessed I feel that my children are healthy, are maybe nervous about school, that they feel some version of this that gives them the confidence to walk into a brand new space with brand new people, feeling smart enough to take it on, having the accessibility to take it on. I have to remind myself that the measure is in the way in which they live their lives, that is a reflection of the parenting that we've provided. And when they do those things, when they show up with confidence, when my kindergartner shows up with confidence and pushes me out of the line, where he says, I'm okay, you go. And I'm like, I'm the one hurt, the one that's scared. He might be scared, but he's feeling like, I can do this. I can do this. Oh, what a gift.
It's interesting. He takes it to a system level. He says, so this love thing is serious for us. And it's a question that we put on the table often when we're engaging with one another. More importantly, when we create policies and systems and structures that are governing the way in which we work. So it's not loving. We have to rethink about how to make it loving if it's not loving.
Right.
And that's where we struggle as systems across, whether it's government systems or school systems or whatever. is that the lens that he puts on, the glasses that he puts on is, he has to see whether there's that real sense of belonging, of compassion, of empathy, of love. To me, it was just pretty beautiful.
I loved it. We're going to use the word love too many times, but yeah, exactly. It's lovely. I've been toying with this idea in my head, and I'm not sure. I think it works, but I'm not sure if it works. And it works for how I take a stance as a coach in spaces where people live their lives differently from me and differently from the way in which school is expecting it to live, to your point on immunizations and et cetera. Can we love people and not opinions? Very hard, because the opinions are the things that I hear, that I feel, et cetera. Or I don't know if opinion is the right word, but that people have the capacity to love others and deserve as much care and support that you would give others. And if I can do that, I'm better at hearing their opinion, understanding their opinion. And opinions change. My goodness. Like, we're all different people. From who I was. Holy. When people say, well, you've changed, I'm like, well, thank God.
On one hand, you want to say, I totally believe in this growth mindset, except that I expect you to be in a fixed mindset. It's like, well, as I take in new information, I do filter it through the way I've been socialized and the beliefs that I hold. And sometimes I make decisions based on that. And also I might want to pay attention to other things as a way to sort of better inform myself so that I can maybe make even better decisions.
Exactly.
Moving forward.
Exactly.
Lavelle says something in his second part. We were talking about data collection.
Yeah.
And the way that he wishes that maybe he had done something differently. And I honed in on something he was talking about because it became really personal for me as a teacher and as an administrator, was to kind of see the same kid succeed who you have always seen succeed, and the same kid underperformed, and you knew, side by side, and tremendous intellect from both kids. And I know this is work that you do, and so I'm kind of curious how you thought about this in terms of your own work, the districts that you support, or questions that sort of came to you. When he talked about, if you continue to look at results, they're pretty predictable. And if you're a kid of color, if you're growing up in poverty in this country, that the results in schools have pretty much been the same. And the data has been flat. The truth is that most people don't even want to talk about it, right? They don't want to talk about it in any kind of real way. And so as we're concluding our conversation today in this inaugural time together, which is super exciting, one of the hopes I have is that you might highlight some questions that came to you that maybe you had wished I had asked, or you could have dug into a little bit more.
I liked his reflection on, let's see, I probably would have made the same mistake. Let's start with that. You put me as superintendent and they say, we're going to have a better tool for collecting, examining, disaggregating, utilizing data to inform the decisions we make about delivery of instruction and content, et cetera. The aha in his reflection was, what are the tools that we're using to collect that data in the first place? And so if the data in and of itself is flawed, having a way to parse that data, well, what's the point of that? So what are the diverse ways in which we could be collecting data was the question that was not asked. He's pointed to culturally inappropriate assessment. Well, you could argue that any assessment created by a person, by definition, will be culturally inappropriate for any other person. That's because people, I see the way, me and you have a ton in common. We love spending time with each other. I love to talk about all the things you're talking about. And we're not the same. We're very different. We have different ways of viewing the world. And so I do believe assessments have missed the mark. But what data should we be collecting? What should we be looking at? I mean, one thing that I think that most systems, I'm about to go support a system to do the very thing that he fumbled with, and that is like better use a data collection system. What data should it collect? Where will the data show success, strengths, intelligence, compassion, care for marginalized groups? Kids of color, kids who don't speak English, kids in poverty, on and on and on. Any other marker of traditionally marginalized groups of kids in schools? Do we have any assessments that highlight their strengths? Usually no.
I found myself sort of doing my own sort of evaluation of my own leadership, which was, boy, we put together such a robust assessment calendar and tried to really listen to what teachers were saying about the number of assessments. And there were so many pieces that I thought we did right. And yet we fundamentally fell short. And we never really first and said, what is it we're trying to create? What do we want for our graduates? We got there maybe towards the end of my superintendency, where we started looking at the portrait of a graduate and then working backwards. And what are the assessments that are going to tell us about that? It helped us weed out some assessments. Be like, why are we doing that assessment? Boy, how I wish I had done a better job going into the superintendency and saying, what is it we're trying to create together? And then to some extent, how will we know that we're getting there? And then to then be able to say, well, so how will we collect that information? Are there already assessments we feel good about?
Love that.
And if not, what are some assessments we could have done?
I love that.
What can we adopt?
This is the truth. This is like who I was as a teacher then and who I am as a teacher now. I'm way more knowledgeable.
This is great. I'm looking forward to talking about this, continuing our conversations. Anything coming up in your world that you want people to know about?
Our work is just kicking off, just like everybody else's work. We do work predominantly with public schools, but any public system. And we're in the kickoff of the year. And to our point earlier about have we ever attended the best opener? Realize that everybody's trying to create their best opener, even if it's not the best opener. They were trying to create that. That's literally what they were trying to do. They want everybody, parents, kids, teachers, everybody to feel supported and excited about starting school.
Thank you, Jamie. Have a great day. Have a great week.
You too. I can't wait to talk about our next guest.
I'm Peter Stiefelman.
I'm Jamie Almanzán.
And this is an Imperfect Leader, Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. Music for An Imperfect Leader was written and arranged by Ian Varley. Sam Falbo created the Daruma doll butterfly artwork. Imperfect leadership is not a scarlet letter. It is a badge of honor. It recognizes that serving as a lead learner is about being a vulnerable leader, an empathetic leader, a compassionate leader. And I'm proud to be an imperfect leader, so I hope you'll join me next time for another episode of An Imperfect Leader, Leadership in After Action. At the end of every interview that we have for teacher candidates, we will say, what questions do you have for us? And they will always ask, well, what kind of support can I expect? And we will always say, well, don't worry, we'll give you a mentor. But it's not real mentorship. I mean, it's support with the difficult kid or the field trip form or the grade card, but it isn't coaching. That's where partners like EdConnective step in. They provide observation and feedback with practice. That's real coaching. Their mission is to ensure that every student thrives by facilitating exceptional educator growth. So whether it's science of reading, whether it's leadership development, whether you're trying to build the best recruitment and retention efforts, check out edconnective.com. Imperfect leaders. Are you facing challenges filling open speech-language pathologist positions within your district? It's kind of a silly question because I know you are. MPAT Speech understands the critical need for qualified professionals in your schools. They recognize that communication lies at the heart of academic success, and that's why they're dedicated to helping you bridge the gap by offering expert therapists and innovative telehealth solutions. Don't let open positions hinder your students' success. Partner with MPAT Speech today and ensure every child in your district has access to the speech therapy they deserve. MPAT Speech, EMPAT Speech.com. Empowering students, empowering schools.